Hello, future us. Right, are you ready? I'll let the people in.
Mhm.
Hello, hello. Hey, Mark, how's it going?
Magnificent as usual.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Hi, welcome.
Right, what's that?
We'll take a few minutes just to let people arrive, but in the meantime, feel free to drop in the chat where you're calling in from. I always love to know, near and far. Yeah, and have a couple minutes, get yourself a cup of tea, get comfy, get settled.
Sorry, for some reason the sounds.
Hey, Darren, Seaford in East Essex. Thank you so much for being here, Darren. Hi, Jules. Nice to have you back again. Hi, Cassia from West Yorkshire. Wonderful. I hope everyone, wherever you are, isn't getting as battered by the wind as we were earlier in the week. Hi, Miriam from the Scottish Borders. Lovely. Lovely. Okay, we'll maybe wait one more minute before we get going. Drizzly North Yorkshire. Yeah, it's very drizzly with me in the East Midlands as well. Well, it's not just you, don't worry. Cool. All right. Well, we'll get started. We might have a few latecomers, which is totally okay. So hello everyone. My name is Rachel, or Rach. I'm communications manager for Trash-Free Trails. Thank you so much for being here to join our fifth and final digital action session. This has been like a really wonderful project to work on to start 2024. And I say start because the first session was back at the end of January. I was thinking just before I came on the call, it's kind of amazing to be starting the last one and it's light outside. It's kind of incredible. So yeah, thank you so much for choosing to spend your Wednesday evening with me. So the idea behind these sessions is to provide you as members of the Trash-Free Trails community and kind of wider ecosystem with a kind of a deeper insight, a deeper understanding, and more ideas about the outcomes from our State of Our Trails report, which we released in November last year. So I'll kind of go into a bit more what we're going to be talking about this evening shortly. But before we get going, just a bit of admin. So the session is being recorded, and that's so folks who couldn't join us synchronously tonight can join us on YouTube afterwards. So feel free to keep your video on, but you're also more than welcome to keep it off. And the kind of only request I have is to perhaps keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking, because this just makes sure that everyone can hear whoever's talking at one time. We're a really nice, cozy group this evening. So if you do have any technical issues, drop a message in the chat to me and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can. I'm not a kind of Zoom wizard, but I normally know how to fix kind of various things. Tonight's session is going to be quite fun because it's a little less of a kind of online panel, which some of our other sessions have been, and it's a bit more of a kind of workshop. So I really, really welcome you to join me in like expanding our knowledge, expanding our learning. And there'll be opportunities to like jump on and have discussion and share your thoughts. So I really welcome you to do so on the microphone, but also feel free to do so in the chat as well. And I'll make sure that I'm kind of keeping tabs and reading out what's being shared there as well. I'm super delighted to be joined by George. George perhaps can give a wave. There we
Hello,
go.
everyone.
George is a recently finished, almost nearly graduated. You handed in your dissertation a couple of weeks ago. A research student from Bangor University. And George is going to be sharing a little bit later some of his insights from his recent study on single-use drinks packaging. So yeah, really excited to hear about that experience. Some of what I've already read has been like super interesting and incredibly insightful. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, George, to share more of your thoughts. So we'll get going. Can everyone see my screen okay as well? Can you see the big orange situation? Okay, cool. If you at any point don't feel like you can see the screen, just holler or drop a message in the chat. So to open this evening's session, I wanted to sort of set the tone a little bit before really getting into what this action point is from the Trash Free Manifesto, and also speak particularly why this theme of accountability is really important for me as a person as well. So alongside my work at Trash Free Trails, I'm also an academic researcher. And one of the things that I work on in my own research is kind of unpacking and exploring how big systems like capitalism affect our bodies and the way we move in the world. And I think, especially through the last couple of years of researching, I've really had to come to terms with the fact that there is a lot we get told in our lives, whether that's by people we know, like family, or through people we meet through kind of the education system, or spaces beyond our kind of immediate surroundings, so like media, the internet, government. And we get told a lot of things. And while it's probably pretty important to be told certain things, because, you know, there are certain things we get told and that's to keep us safe, there's a bit less of a conversation of kind of supporting us to be critical thinkers around all of these things that we get told. And for me, there's this kind of practice and behavior we need to really cultivate in our lives, which is to respectfully and really kindly question what we're told as fact, and kind of go through journeys of inquiry, go through learning experiences, and figure out actually what we believe is right, what's right for us. And to do that in a way that's really kind and compassionate to other people and our differences as well. And there's so much more I could really say about that. We could have a whole session on, you know, deconstructing our conditioning as human beings in big systems. But I wanted to bring it here because I think particularly around this idea of accountability, and we're going to be talking about, you know, big brands and big corporations, it's really easy to fall into the trap of this is right and this is wrong. You know, we are the good guys and they are the bad guys. And I know I do this all the time, but I really want to challenge that in myself. And I kind of invite us all to kind of gently challenge that in ourselves, because what I'm trying to practice, and definitely what I feel that being a part of Trash Free Trails has allowed me to practice, is being much gentler and more open in my approach to difficult conversations, to these kind of quite challenging topics, and to conversations where you might be at quite, you know, like kind of polarities to one another, be on one side and the other. And I think it's this kind of questioning of what we've been told and wearing our critical thinking hats, but then also saying to other people, this is what I've learned, this is what I believe, what do you think? And that kind of asking of that question that will really make a difference and opens us up to the possibility of learning from people who have different experiences, who think differently to us and believe in different things to us. And I think kind of, if there's anything we can take away from the journey we're on to try and achieve Trash Free Trails, it's that. It's about being more open and more kind and compassionate. this for me is really, really enfolded into our values as an organization, which is something for me I'm really, really proud of. And particularly this value, we never use blame, shame, guilt, or aggression as a tactic, is a really big part of that. I think we've all gotten pretty angry at the brands we find on our trails. We've all had the experience of like shouting at them or yelling our frustrations on social media or trying to send angry emails to people. But we've found at TFT that isn't working for us. That isn't making the change we need to see to achieve our mission and make our trails kind of safer and better and a healthier place. And so we're trying to go for a different approach. And we're going with what we believe might work based on our learning and our experience. So these are these kind of two perspectives I really invite us to bring to the conversation this evening. I welcome your critical thinking. I really welcome what you believe and what your experiences have taught you. And I also really am open to our differences as well and where we might disagree, because I think accountability has to also be part of having those kind of slightly more difficult, slightly more challenging conversations, but having them with compassion as well. So that's my preamble, but I'll get into the actual kind of nitty-gritty. So we're here to talk about this point on our trash-free manifesto. So this is shared responsibility. It's called Own Your Shit, which I'm really delighted to say, actually, because I've been trying to really not swear on these calls. So it's really satisfying to be able to talk about it in this way. So if you joined us back in January for the first digital action session we had, and no stress if you didn't, it is available on YouTube to watch afterwards. In that session, we dived into why we're, as an organization, trying to shift away from using the term litter to using the phrase single-use pollution. And so you might already have gathered a bit of why we have this kind of phrase around shared responsibility and why we're trying to talk about that more openly. And so the reason behind that, I'll kind of do a bit of a briefing on that kind of thing around litter. So the word litter reinforces this narrative that it's the consumer's fault, that there's so much stuff, there's so much trash on our trails, there's so much stuff in the green spaces that we adventure in. And this is something that isn't just repeated by us in the language that we're using, it's also being perpetuated by the brands we're finding as well. And what we're finding through our research is that in reality, this is another example of something that we get told as a truth, but actually it's much more complicated than that. It's kind of a bit of a generalization that it's solely the consumer's fault, that so much litter is ending up in our ecosystems. And so by telling us this repeatedly, brands are able to kind of continue producing products, continue producing packaging, continue to allow it to enter into our natural spaces without changing anything. They're continuing at their status quo, they're continuing through kind of profit-driven models, and they're not working or aware of or holding awareness of the impact that it's having on the wider the wider environment. And so through the State of Our Trails report that we released in November, we really wanted to bring attention to this and do research into what was actually going on. So what have brands said about trash and single-use pollution? What have they done about it, if anything? What's their relationship to protecting trail ecosystems? And what do they think about the policies that we think are going to be really fundamental to achieving a trash-free future? And kind of through that research process, we found some like pretty astonishing information. So kind of a few examples. I've got some images on the screen here, and kind of all of the research that's here, I'm going to link at the end of the session as kind of further reading resources if anyone's interested. So one of the kind of key things that we really found was that brands repeatedly make promises and then break them. They kind of make these promises that they're going to do better in terms of environmental actions or sustainability markers. But there's no kind of external pressure and there's no consequence for not keeping those promises. So they just break them, because often taking action to be more sustainable does cost them more money. A prime example of this is that in 1990, Coca-Cola set an aim to increase their use of recycled materials in their bottles by 25%. And as of 2020, they're still only at 10%. So in 30 years, they haven't moved at all, essentially. So that's kind of one example of some of what's happening in the field. Another is that a lot of brands are involved in quite heavy lobbying against legislation that's going to reduce the amount of pollution that we're finding in our environment. And that's kind of seen across the board. There's a few examples here of news articles around both kind of, Coca-Cola as drinks brands and other drinks brands, but also alcohol brands as well, like whiskey up in Scotland, were very anti the introduction of a deposit return scheme, which would have seen a kind of huge reduction in the amount of pollution that we're finding in our ecosystems. And some of the research we found that was kind of between 1991 and 2011, in the US, the beverage industry spent 30 times more pushing against these kind of legislative measures than the lobbying groups who were for them could. So they're spending huge amounts of money trying to push against these kind of pieces of legislation. And then what we also find through like some of the amazing research being done by bigger kind of organizations like Greenpeace is that internally, these brands are also quite vocal about being against and having to work against some of these measures that are going to limit their kind of status quo way of working. So in 2017, there was a quite significant presentation, an internal presentation by a group at Coca-Cola. It was Coca-Cola Europe that was leaked that showed that they kind of had this drive to fight back against the kind of introduction of a deposit return scheme in Europe. So this image down here, I'll just zoom in so y'all can see it. So this is a slide from that presentation. And so these are kind of different policies coming in the EU. And you'll see in this top corner, there's this bubble that says fight back. And you can see here, there's two pieces of legislation that are really key. So the first one is the EU scheme for deposit systems and the disruptive/unfair EPR scheme. So EPR is extended producer responsibility. So it's this idea that producers of packaging have to be responsible for its full life cycle. So those are two examples of really key legislation that evidence shows will have a massive impact on reducing the amount of pollution in the natural environment, that Coca-Cola were really keen to fight against. They were really keen to push back on. They felt that they were unfair for them as a business. So those are just kind of a few examples of some of the things that we've kind of discovered. And a lot of this research has been really bolstered by the research of other NGOs as well and other organizations. So this table here in the top left is our top 20 brands. We call it the Battle of the Brands. So these are the top 20 brands that our citizen scientists, our community, have found on our trails. But we've popped in comparisons to a couple of other NGOs and organizations reporting on the brands they're finding. So we've got Surfers Against Sewage and people like Planet Patrol, who also do really significant work in this area. And so we can also see there's quite a lot of kind of similarities, but also differences in the brands that we're finding, but they are appearing in different environments as well. Another kind of big piece of the puzzle, another organization that's been really big in kind of figuring that out is the CLF, which is this document here. So the CLF is the Conservation Law Foundation, and they wrote this really significant document in 2022, which is the Big Beverage Playbook for Avoiding Responsibility. And that really outlines these kind of tactics that brands are using to avoid taking action to reduce the amount of pollution that their products are perpetuating. So I'll link a lot of these at the end of the session, because not only are they like very significant pieces of work, it's also really fascinating to learn a bit more about what's going on behind the scenes almost. I think a lot of this kind of action is it's saying one thing, but another thing is maybe happening behind closed doors, and how do we create more transparency? And we'll talk about that a bit later. So it's clear to us from our research that brands are part of the litter issue. They're part of the problem. They're perpetuating this narrative that the consumer is completely to blame for the problem, but actually their behaviors, both public ones and private ones, really show that they recognize there's a lot more going on. There's a lot more that actually could kind of resist their status quo, could like restrict their status quo way of working. And so they're making quite huge maneuvers to do things about that, to change that, to tackle that, or fight back against it, in Coca-Cola's words. And, you know, these are big corporations. They have a lot of financial power. They have a lot of authority. They might have a lot of authority within different spaces, including government as well. And in this way, they're able to maneuver responsibility away from themselves. And I think, again, this is a really prime example of a narrative we often get told. You know, we're small fish, and Coca-Cola, as an example, is a big fish. They have all the power, they have all the money, we can't do anything about it. And definitely part of our research has been also figuring out how to destabilize that as a narrative, as something that we've been told, because for trash-free trails, we believe, but we also know through what we've done over the last kind of 5-6 years, that actually this isn't the case. We do have power, we do have capacity to make change, but the hard bit is actually creating the space where all parties invest, because there are so many different groups who are part of this issue around pollution on our trails. How do we bring everyone to the table and make them feel part of building the solution? And this is definitely what we think we need to do with the brands that are on our list, that are on other people's audits. And the approach that we're trying to take over the next couple of years is to what we call a human approach. We're trying to think about, okay, it's Coca-Cola, but behind Coca-Cola are people just like us. How can we meet them where they are? And how can we have conversations that are open and compassionate, but also honest as well? And I think this is why own your shit as a mentality has become really integral to the soot report and the trash-free manifesto more widely. We want to get going on big campaigns and big moments, and that's something we're gearing towards. But we also want to be talking about the fact that our door is open, and actually our community have a lot of the answers these brands need to take action and be part of the solution as well. So before we get into kind of the more kind of interactive element, I appreciate you've heard me talk quite a lot. So I'm going to bring George in, because George's research has specifically been on Lucozade as a brand, which, as you'll kind of see from our work, has been the #1 brand we've found on our trails over the last few years. And I think George's research will really help contextualize some of the kind of more detailed learning that we've had in this area. So George, do you want to just provide for everyone here like a bit of an overview of what your research has been? What was your question and your starting point, and also what have you found as well?
Sure. So when I first started my research, I was trying to look at kind of a new angle to deal with plastic pollution from energy drinks. And I wanted to look at the ways that energy drink brands market themselves, and particularly the way they've used techniques like religion and spirituality in their advertising, but how then we can use that for combating single-use pollution. The reason I went with Lucozade as the focus of my research was because, as you said, it is one of the top brands for energy drink pollution in the UK. And of course, it does have a big presence on recreational trails. In order to really uncover the kind of marketing techniques used by Lucozade and the way Lucosade's used religion and spirituality, I did a full analysis of Lucosade's advert starting from really the 1930s. And I looked at the extent at which Suntory tries to combat single-use pollution and how much anti-litter messaging is actually included in Lucozade adverts. I've also looked at some new and somewhat experimental approaches to combating single-use pollution, like warning labels, as they have shown some efficacy in the tobacco industry. In regards to what I found that religious and spiritual values have been consistently used really from about the 1950s in Lucozade advertising. It's used the notion of testimony, which was initially parents talking about the restorative effects of Lucozade perhaps on their children, and this later shifted to the testimony of healthy athletic individuals and just renowned sports figures more generally that would then go and promote Lucozade. Daley Thompson being a notable example towards the end of the 20th century. There was also a distinct focus on the nuclear family in Lucosade's advertising in the mid-20th century. And today, Suntory claims to abide by notions of environmental stewardship. To look at really how some of these values can be used more positively, I examined the strategies of several prominent religious environmental organizations such as Aroka, Eco-Judaism, and Eco-Islam. So testimony is a successful marketing technique and can be used effectively towards green ends. This has been included on Aroka, which has then used it to encourage people towards environmentally sustainable actions, something which Lucozade has the potential to incorporate more of into its advertising, but isn't currently. And Eco-Judaism uses environmental stewardship to promote environmental education, community involvement, and these have proven efficacy in promoting environmentally responsible behaviors, something which, again, Suntory doesn't currently do. A further aspect is really looking into how Lucozade promotes its image on social media. And after being challenged, Lucozade has constantly pointed to things like support for DRS, certain schemes that it supports, like the Love Your Forest campaign. Yet, when it actually comes to the amount of anti-litter messaging in Lucozade adverts, there's really not much to be found. The only example of anti-litter messaging I found in a Lucozade advert prior to 2020 was in 1990, and it was most likely accidental because it was John Barnes, who was a football player, kicking a used Lucozade can into a bin. And the only example which shows someone after 2020 of actually responsibly disposing of a Lucozade product is from one advert from Lucozade Energy, where a man throws an empty Lucozade Energy bottle into a bin. When I did this, I also used a very generous and broad definition of anti-litter messaging, which could basically be any single recycle symbol seen somewhere on the frame of an advert or on like a billboard or something of the likes. And it's also worth noting that when the recycle symbol was present, it's often been very small and easy to miss, just tucked away in a corner somewhere. There's never any text in Lucozade adverts which encourages people to responsibly dispose of its products after use either. And there are lots of even recent examples of Lucozade adverts which have absolutely no anti-litter messaging. And to reiterate, this is after Lucozade has said it's introducing more anti-litter messaging into its advertising. So when actually looking at statistics, for post-2020 video adverts, only around 22% of the total advertising features any kind of anti-litter messaging anywhere. Yeah.
Wow,
That's kind
thank
of
you
a
so
summary of
much.
some parts.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly fascinating. There's so much in there. Like, I love this kind of really interesting thing about the kind of earlier like marketing of Lucozade being attached to this idea of the nuclear family is really interesting. I think there's so much to be said about the comparison you made between the tactics that Lucozade has used in comparison with kind of pro-environmental groups as well, and the fact that, you know, you might think of a big brand and an environmental group as actually being very different, but actually the ways that they operate and they garner kind of awareness or an audience are very, very similar. And I think that really speaks to the fact that though we might feel very far away from each other, we're actually not. Definitely in the way we work. And I mean, just like super wild to think that there's this kind of, even as recently as like the last few years, there's marketing adverts that Lucozade have put out that don't include any like anti-litter messaging whatsoever. Super interesting. I've just seen Miriam's popped in the chat about you talk about anti-litter messaging, but do we know if that sort of messaging is actually making a difference? I wonder if you have any kind of thoughts on that from your research, George.
There is some evidence to suggest that if we see other people doing positive things like disposing of litter, or even if we're in fact in green environments, which are then, people are then more likely to not litter themselves, and to dispose of things properly. And something Lucozade has constantly done is use popular figures in advertising. People, especially young people who tend to be more of the market for Lucozade and energy drink brands, are then more likely to go and act accordingly and then dispose of things themselves if they see other people they look up to doing it. During my research, I focused a lot on the media side of things. So admittedly, I could probably dig into that a bit more in terms of data.
And I definitely think there's some really interesting things that we found through our research, Miriam, like kind of over the longer term. So there's some really interesting research being done around the language that's used around kind of anti-litter messaging. So this idea that don't litter as a phrase is less effective than a sign that says, thank you for leaving this trail tidy or this forest tidy. So this idea of these more kind of direct what's the kind of like rule enforcement kind of languages. They're almost not necessarily aggressive, but they're very forceful. I think is a prime example of how actually the way that we approach anti-litter messaging has to be very sensitive and has to be very considered, because actually if a don't litter sign is going to put someone off throwing it away in a bin, then actually, yes, perhaps we should use messaging that is more positive overall. It's already thanking them for an action that they haven't yet taken. And George, you mentioned about making some comparisons to the tobacco industry and the way that their marketing has changed through kind of legislation. And I think, there's some really interesting research happening to look at what would happen if there was a lot more, the word is escaping my mind, but kind of information on packaging that was focused on kind of the impacts of littering. So one of the things that Dom, our CEO at TFT, talks about is what if, like the tobacco, like a pack of cigarettes, you have imagery of the impacts of smoking. On a Lucozade bottle, you had a picture of the impacts. You had a picture of, some kind of animal caught in the bottle, unable to escape, and what impact that might have as well.
Yeah. I did quite a lot of research into looking at how the tobacco industry changed its approach over time, because originally it used to just be text warning labels, and then these would eventually change to rotating health warning labels. And then at the turn of the 21st century, we really started to see the rollout of graphic health warning labels, and ones which showed the most explicit images, so gory images and the such, because they're able to create a strong kind of emotional feeling in someone that's going to then buy a pack of cigarettes, do have the greatest results on actually reducing smoking rates.
Definitely.
So, and also I looked into kind of what kind of images would really be best to have on, let's say, drinks bottles if we wanted to try and reduce single-use pollution. And it wasn't done in respect to single-use pollution, but a lot of people, particularly in the West, tend to value some animals more than others, like might value dogs or cats more than pigs or cows. But then when you have consumers who don't typically value animals like pigs, but then you show a picture of a pig tethered to, a pole or something and it's suffering, that is actually likely to affect purchases, even in people that don't typically care about animals. So trying to introduce graphic warning labels onto single-use drink bottles that show images of animals in distress could actually be a very effective way of doing it, because it has reduced smoking rates, although, it's a different thing really.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, it's a really interesting one, this idea of obviously smoking affects the health of the user, whereas the idea of, putting on packaging that impacts on another, on flora or fauna, would it have the same effect, is a really fascinating question that hopefully over the next few years, research will be able to unravel. There's some really lovely shares in the chat which are kind of talking about remembering Lucozade adverts that kind of showed this idea of Lucozade being something to give to a sick child.
Yeah.
Mark shared an image of an 80s Lucozade bottle he found last summer, which is just like surreal.
Yeah, it really
super
changed
interesting.
around the 80s and 90s, where Lucozade suddenly went more towards the sports market. But yeah, exactly. It did used to market itself towards sick people.
Yeah, definitely. And it still has that kind of theme of making you better in some way. So obviously it was a health oriented thing, but now it's the idea of like sports performance as well. It's really fascinating how there's this kind of vision of it being something that makes you better. And again, that's not dissimilar to the way we talk about going out and doing trail cleaning at TFT. We know from our research that does make people feel good about themselves. It makes them feel good about themselves, their community, and their natural environment. So really, we aren't so far apart than we think we are. So I'd love to hear, like, I can understand that a brand like Lucozade is probably pretty resistant to the kind of sustainable changes it needs to make because of the cost. And I wonder, George, is it actually doing enough in your mind to promote responsible disposal on, if they're saying that it is the consumer's fault? Do they need to be doing more from your point of view?
Yes, I think they need to be doing quite a lot more actually. Simply, they're not introducing much in terms of anti-litter messaging. And when it actually comes to Lucozade products itself, it is only the Lucozade Sport bottles which actually have a recycle symbol on the front of the packaging.
Wow. I had no idea. That's so surreal.
Yeah, I don't know why Lucozade Sport only has it on the front. It just is the case for some reason. Their account report from 2022 shows they had over a 500 million pound turnover and over a 250 million pound gross profit, yet it's actually invested very modest amounts into tackling single-use pollution. Out of the recycle symbols, at most, a single act aimed at reducing plastic pollution is kind of shown in a marketing campaign. And whenever Lucozade, sorry, is criticized over social media regarding the prevalence of Lucozade pollution, it always supports to a couple of environmental projects. It has supported like Love Your Forest, or it supports to some policies. It supports like deposit return schemes, but there's never really a clear acknowledgement that it needs to do more in the present to tackle single-use pollution. And the kind of lack of responsibility that they take for the pollution of their brand can be also shown in the wording they use over social media when they've actually been criticized by people. So it's been things like, to quote, "We need people's behaviors to change," as opposed to things like, "We need to rethink our environmental strategies." I think if it really wants to be serious about promoting responsible disposal, it needs to start introducing more anti-litter messaging into its advertising, actually working with environmental organizations more, because there are organizations like TFT and other organizations who aren't going to take a confrontational approach, aren't going to treat them as evil, or just going to try and get along with them to make something productive happen. And look at how we can use testimony more positively as well. So, as I said, we could get popular sportsmen and sportswomen, we could show images or videos products in adverts, or giving their own thoughts on why they think it's so important, because then that could act as a role model for other people to follow.
Mm, yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I think the impact of influential figures is huge, and that's definitely something that we see at TFT, and I see it in other people's work as well. I've just seen Jules has popped in a note. I've seen some YouTubers pushing an anti-litter message on their channel. And then you've made a mention around Sam Pilgrim, because he's no longer sponsored by Monster. And yeah, Monster is a really big culprit for being found on our trails in our research, definitely. It's a really prime example of also the kind of culture that different brands cultivate around their kind of brand identity as well. So Lucozade, Red Bull, Monster, they've all kind of got these kind of themes around them of being sort of go, 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 high energy. Monster and Red Bull particularly have these kind of themes of being for people who are risk takers, people who want to get out and do stuff and push themselves to their limits. And with that, there's kind of a theme underlying that, which is kind of almost a kind of carefree or careless sort of attitude, which definitely is perpetuated in the way people then would probably go out and drop cans. So yeah, thanks for bringing up Monster, Jules. That's really, really interesting. George, I have one more question for you, which is more of a personal one than about your research, which was, has your perception of Lucozade as a brand changed through your research? You know, were you a Lucozade lover before, and do you feel quite against them now? What's your relationship to it, and how has it changed?
I never really drank Lucozade products all that much. I don't drink energy products at the moment, but my view on them as a brand has shifted over time. When looking at how Lucozade claims itself to be adhering to values like environmental stewardship, and then looking at the reality of the situation, I can't help but feel a little bit negative about it, because it's trying to present itself as more eco-friendly than it's actually doing when it comes to advertising. And it almost copy pastes the same kind of responses to people who question Lucozade pollution. And always points to the support of the same schemes, like deposit return schemes. It kind of gives the impression that they don't really want to try and change their approach to single-use pollution. But I'd be happy to be proven wrong on that point if there is a change. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'd all be pretty happy to be proven wrong. Yeah, so George, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, George. Like, it really gives a sense of, yeah, just spotlighting a specific brand really gives us a better sense of like what is going on a very detailed level. George has written like 2 amazing blog pieces for the TFT website about some of his research, and he's going to be writing some more. And the kind of research that George has done as part of his master's is going to be available as a full kind of public report later on this year. So please do keep your eyes out for that. But yeah, that last point particularly makes me think of I think the first blog that you did, George, we said, when brands say thank you, do they really mean it? Because there's this real commonplace of people responding to tweets where people are saying like, oh, I keep finding your bottles on my trails, and they say, oh, thank you so much for writing to us, you know, we really do care about this. And that kind of repetition, rather than writing from an authentic voice, that's like, it's not a clickbait kind of response, it's just it being much more personal, just doesn't seem to happen. And I definitely think even that would make a huge difference, definitely. Yeah, thank you so much. So we're going to move into the deeper, more interactive part of the session, which I'm really looking forward to. I appreciate it is 7:45 on a Wednesday, so you might just want to be listening, and that's totally welcome. We've talked a bit around accountability as a word, but what I want to kind of get into now is, what does it mean to you? Because I think accountability is one of those words that gets used quite a lot, especially in recent years. But it's a bit elusive as to like what it practically means. What does accountability actually look like in practice? And I feel like, rather than like telling you what I think, I want to know what you think. What does accountability mean to you? So feel free to jump on the mic or share your thoughts in the chat. And I've got here a little board you can see on the screen, and I've got some post-it notes that I will write your thoughts on, so we can kind of collate them together. Would anyone like to go first? I'll also give you a minute to think about it. Oh, Mark, go for it.
I think it's something you've got to sign up to. You know, whether you take accountability is a choice. You've got to sign up to it. It's got to be very much in black and white. I don't think it can just be something you can say in word. If it's in black and white and it's agreement, you're more likely to go do it.
So there's something there about it also perhaps needs to be shared between people. It can't be, it's quite hard to be accountable on your own. It needs to be kind of split between people or as part of a discourse or with a kind of public, would you say?
Yeah, it's just there has to be an acceptance. You know, it's an obligation. You know, it's a willingness to accept. You know, so they have to sign up to it. And you know, for big corporations to do it, the only way you're going to get them to do it is by putting something in writing, black and white. That is what they're going to test to do.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Mark. Jules, I saw you turned your mic on. Did you want to jump in? No stress if not. Anyone else want to jump in, share their thoughts? What does accountability mean to you?
I'll jump in if that's okay.
Go for it.
I feel like for me, it's brands recognizing the issue. I know something that I've seen is very sort of niche brands that do appear on the trails, and their users are perhaps not as sort of aware of the issue. I don't want to name brands, but you know, the little tabs that you see on the ground everywhere, certain gels. I actually approached one of the brand ambassadors, and there was sort of like almost a denial of the issue. And again, yeah, it just goes to blaming the people that are using it as opposed to like the actual issue of the packaging. So yeah, just awareness, I think, from the big brands.
Yeah. No, 100%, 100%. And I think that's why research by NGOs is really, really important. And I know I'm saying that as someone who works for TFT and we do a lot of research into what's out there. But the research that's being done by other NGOs is super, super important because it's really painting this much clearer picture of what actually is out there because so little research has been done in that area. Miriam, I saw you turned your mic on. Do you want to jump in and share your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess it wasn't really, I was thinking about whether it's accountability or not, but I was thinking about extended producer responsibility, which eventually will mean that these businesses will have to make plans to either eliminate their single-use litter or at the very least sort of be responsible for the cost of recycling it. But I guess because of the fact that will be forced upon them, that's not accountability as such. That's forcing accountability. But I guess it's one tool we're going to have to use if they don't do it through choice.
Yeah, and there's something really interesting in that, in the fact that it is inevitable. It is, they will have to face up to it eventually. And so why not be part of the wave of change rather than be run over by the wave of change, so to speak? No, I think that's really important. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, if they can get in and do it before they're forced to do it, it'd be good for their sort of PR and reputation.
Definitely. Yeah, we have this phrase in the team, which is be the tide, and that definitely feels like that. Thank you so much, Miriam. There's some really good thoughts in the chat as well. So Jill said, I think this still plays to the individual responsibility, but I like the idea of photographing the snacks you take out on the trail and then a photo of the same wrappers on return from the trail to show you took them home, took home the packaging that you took with you. And she also referred to gels as being a great example. Thank you, Will, for bringing those up. I love that idea. I think that is super important, and actually really is a great way that we can go against this kind of theme of it being the consumer's fault and kind of go against that conventional narrative. I will add that in. Bruce has said, what information is there on positive behaviours being demonstrated by ambassadors and influencers? That's a really good question. And I'm sure there's some people doing like very much grounded research in that. I can speak kind of anecdotally to the fact that definitely at TFT, we see a tremendous increase in engagement with our mission when people like athletes engage with our mission particularly. So these people who normally have pretty big followings, and when they get to speak about things they're passionate about, people who are in their audience really respond to that. But yeah, it'd be really great to gather some more information on that. I'll see what I can do after this session. Thank you for that question. Jules said, accountability can be viewed as sitting above responsibility. So we all, consumers, have responsibility for our own actions, but the producer has an accountability to try and ensure that their customers dispose of their products in an appropriate fashion. I love that idea of where it sits in relationship to responsibility. That feels really important. I'm going to write accountability in relationship to responsibility. Thank you for that. And Miriam, and then Cassia said, measurable responsibility, setting a strategy and measurable goals, and then reporting the results within a design deadline, being aware of the impact one's actions have on the environment and acting adequately to tackle it effectively. Oof, that feels like something you could just send to a brand and be like, do this, and you'll be set. So thank you for that. So measurable responsibility. I love that, thank you. And then Miriam said, I did one running race where you had to put your race number on all your food packaging. So if litter was found, they could identify who dropped it. Wow, that is really interesting. That's really bold. I love that as an idea. I think that's really important because I think also, although we are here talking about the fact that we need to move away from the narrative of it being the consumer's fault, also being able to like own your shit between us as communities is really important as well. And that doesn't need to be a sort of like finger wagging, you did bad, you're the bad guy. It can more be just a gentle reminder, because actually one of the things that we know is that pollution actually gets dropped by accident all the time. Thanks, Miriam, for that share. That's super interesting. Any other kind of thoughts on what accountability means to you?
I think other people sort of covered it already, but I think a real willingness to be fully transparent is a part of accountability. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to talk about transparency in a little bit. Oh, guys, thank you so much for that. That has already got my brain absolutely bubbling. So I'm going to move us through. So I think these are really important because of the fact that accountability can be quite kind of strange and unclear what it practically means. But I think here we've already started to kind of grapple with some of these ideas of what it can look like and also how it can take shape as well. So at TFT, we've kind of attempted to break accountability down into things that can be done into actions. And so they fall into three areas. There's acknowledgement, there's transparency, which George has spoken to, and then there's positive action, which like everybody here has already started talking about. And these are almost, in our view, a kind of step-by-step guide to what in some spheres you might almost call reparative action, which is this idea of sort of like acknowledging the fact that you've been part of the problem and you're taking action to be part of the solution. So we call that the Own Your Shit checklist. And kind of over the last few months, kind of out of the process of writing the soot report, we've been kind of collating these kind of ideas of tangible actions for each of those three areas. And so I'd love now to go through these and have a little brainstorm all together of kind of actions that you'd want to see brands doing in each of these areas. So we can start with kind of acknowledgement as an example. So what would a brand acknowledging its responsibility look like for you? What would you want to see them do? So I'll let you kind of sit with that for a minute and then share your thoughts. Feel free to jump in. I can feel everyone's brains bubbling in the background through the digital sphere. Miriam, thank you. So Miriam said, publishing data on the amount of packaging they produced and how much was reused and recycled on an annual basis so you can see the trends. Thank you. That is, yes, 100% that needs to happen. And you wrote that so well. I'm going to copy and paste it onto a post-it note. Thank you, Miriam. Acknowledgement, Bruce said, acknowledgement is willingness to have a meaningful dialogue and not run a counter campaign. That is beautiful. Thank you so much, Bruce. Have meaningful dialogue. Amazing. Thank you for that. That feels really important, not running counter campaigns. So not saying one thing and doing another. Definitely. Thank you. Cassia said, annual report of the environmental impact, acknowledging the issue and taking steps to reduce it. And some brands already do this. Trek, Finisterre, Alpkit. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that is super important. Why aren't big brands doing research on how much of their product is ending up in natural ecosystems? Why are we the only people doing this research? I think Coca-Cola should be doing research into how many Coca-Cola products end up littered in natural spaces. Thank you for that. Environmental impact. Ellie then said, signing up to a campaign, making a pledge and releasing a public statement. I'm losing my ability to talk, guys, I'm sorry. Statement on how they will be making changes with key targets and dates. Yes, 100%. And I think there really needs to be this sense of with statement making, I think it can't just be like a one-time thing. I think it needs to be make a statement and then make consistent efforts to back that and to talk about it more than once. Because I think with how much information comes out all the time, it's really easy for a company to make a statement and then it's like out of the public eye the next day. So how can they actually really consistently commit to talking about it as well? Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, I love these. These are amazing, guys. Thank you so much. Mark said, a hands up message across all media platforms, acknowledging the evidence that their products are ending up in our ecosystems with a pledge of how they're going to tackle it. Oh, definitely. I think there's a real quickness, and I think that's really seen in George's research as well, to not even say, yes, we know that this is happening. It's always oh, but it's not our fault. And actually to be like, we know that our bottles are on your trails. It's really rubbish. We're really sorry. I think that is really key. Thank you so much, Mark. Acknowledging evidence. Thank you so much. Any other thoughts on what you want acknowledgement to look like? These are all amazing. Thank you so much. I'll chuck in a couple more thoughts. So some of the things that we've talked about is acknowledgement, always also looking like having direct conversations with people who can help. So an example of this would be that last year we called out Lucozade on our social media and they commented and they said, we'd love to have a conversation with you. And we emailed them and they emailed us back. And when we emailed them back, they stopped emailing us. And what we think should actually be the process of acknowledgement is actually we have a really fruitful conversation. We have some meetings with them. We as a community go and present our research to their teams. We kind of open up a long-term conversation, a long-term relationship with brands. And I say we as Trash Free Trails, but that could be any organization who's working within this space, to really showcase the fact that actually brands don't in-house need to be experts on the solutions, because actually there are already people and groups who exist who have ideas, who have solutions. That's so present here this evening. Yeah, thank you so much. A couple others that come up for us is kind of looking at acknowledgement of the fact that lots of brands, particularly brands that we find on our trails, use trails in their marketing. So there's almost a double standard happening there, and having more acknowledgement of that. If you're using an ecosystem in your marketing, why aren't you taking more steps to take care of it, and kind of bringing more attention to that? And then we've also looked at doing kind of education, kind of acknowledgement through education. How can they showcase that they are taking steps through their kind of outreach work? Okay, amazing. I'm going to move on to step 2, which is transparency, which George mentioned. So some of you have already talked about this a bit in the acknowledgement, these idea of annual reportings on what's being produced. And I'm just curious, are there any other thoughts about what kind of transparency, what information do you want from brands that you're not currently getting? Maybe have a think about it and let me know in the chat or jump on the mic. Just seeing, Mark, you popped in about their brand ambassadors joining in on TFT Trail Cleans, and that you're very happy to guide. We will let them all know. Yeah, and do we send SOOT report to the top 10 brands? So yeah, so we sent the SOOT report to the 20 brands that were on last year's report, and we're going to kind of keep doing that process, definitely. Just going to bring some of these thoughts over from the previous slide on packaging production. I think I'm going to kick us off and say that one of the things I really want to know is how much money they're spending on lobbying and what policies they're lobbying for. Because I think for me, that's not only important for understanding what those brands stand for and they're pushing for, but also who's funding different political behaviours as well, and how they're influencing policy change on a bigger scale as well. So Miriam said, I know the alternatives to single-use plastics are problematic, so it's not easy or cheap to change packaging, but it'd be good to know what brands are researching and what they've tried. I love that idea. That's also very solutions focused, Miriam, which I really like. Thank you. What alternatives do single-use brands try and share for research? Thank you. Really love that. Any other thoughts? What does transparency look like for you? What would a transparent brand look like for you? Yeah, public reporting, so impact reports. Yeah, so at TFT, we do annual reports. So every year we release a report which talks about what we call our impact as an organization. So that covers everything from how much trash our community has removed, to what our ambassadors have done, to how much engagement we've had on social media. It covers like lots of different bases to talk about impact on a very broad scale. It would be amazing to look at brands impact reports. Definitely, especially as lots of brands sponsor, yeah, whether it's athletes, they work across different industries as well. Definitely that feels super important. Mark said, if a brand is going to pledge to make a difference, then they need to publish where they are up to in the public domain and be prepared to be challenged. Definitely. I'm gonna do a quick copy and paste because that's a great thought. Thank you. Cassia said traceability information of the product from the material sourcing to manufacturing to packaging. Perfect. I love that idea. Yeah, we need clearer information on the whole process of where products are made, who they're made by, where they come from, who gets paid in the process as well. Feels very important too. Amazing. Thanks, guys. Okay, I'm going to move us on from transparency, but do chuck ideas in the chat if you have them. So the last one is positive action. So what would a positive action by a brand look like? Some thoughts have already come up here, so I'm going to chuck the big one that came up for me was actually Mark's, which is brands joining cleanups. Feels like a big one. It'd be great to have the, the Coca-Cola UK team join in with our Earth Day Spring Clean. I'd love that. What does positive action look like for you? What would a brand's positive action look like for you? Or Ellie's put a great idea in, which goes into transparency, but I'm going to chuck it on this one as well because it feels very important, which is about publishing carbon footprints of each product. That's great. Thank you, Ellie. Mark said, if the brand made the reduction of their products measured in our ecosystems part of their remuneration package, that's also a great idea. Definitely. Asking for help rather than something performative, definitely. Thank you for that, Jill. Miriam said, positive action would be actually trialing alternative models, such as drinks refills, reusable bottles, and DRS. Yeah, definitely. I will say that I occasionally love a bottle of Diet Coke and I resist buying them, but I would love it if I could go get a refillable Diet Coke on occasion. That would be great. So
Yeah,
Bruce said related. Oh, jump in, go for it.
Sorry, I
George.
was just going to say, I think that'd be one of the main ones for me would be to see a real commitment from brands to try and look at alternatives to single-use drink containers. That would be a very big one, but it might be some time yet, unfortunately.
But even showing a commitment to trying to make that happen. So researching alternatives to. Yeah, I would love it if, you could go tour the Lucozade factory and see what they're making to find alternatives. That would be amazing. Oh, there's some great thoughts in the chat. So Bruce said, related to cleanups, brands acting together on plastic pollution, an industry-wide message like in gambling. Yes, that does feel very important. That also really speaks to me, Bruce, to that idea of going against that kind of that dominant narrative of competition between brands. Actually, plastic pollution is something that they all have to deal with. As Miriam said, it's going to be inevitable. So why not work together on it? That's super great. Thank you so much. Jules said, including an appropriate message regarding disposable of packaging in their marketing, i.e. using it as a marketing tool. Yeah, definitely. That feels like, it's really clear from George, your research, that that's the place to start. They have complete ownership over what they put on their packaging. Why not start putting things that showcase kind of, positive behaviors. And then Cassius has said, 1, a commitment to environmentally responsible manufacturing, 2, research in environmental innovation, and 3, reducing carbon footprint sources locally. And then I think is going to share a few examples, which I'm always very here for. Thank you. Oh, these are really fantastic thoughts. Thank you so much. Keep chucking them in the chat because we're recording, the chat will save. So even if I don't read them out, they will end up being documented. It's 9 minutes past 8. I can't believe it's nearly the end. There's so many amazing ideas here. Thank you so much for your generosity and your brain power, especially at this time of day on hump day in the middle of the week. But I think, you know, what we've done here it's been about 20-25 minutes of that discussion, is we've actually developed really clear actions that we as Trash Free Trails can suggest to brands, but actually you could do that as well. I think, you know, you don't have to be working for an environmental NGO to go and talk to brands about what you want them to do. If we're part of the consumers that they paint as being the kind of problem in this narrative, go give them solutions, go give them ideas, whether that's writing to them on social media, sending people emails, tagging them when you're finding their bottles out on your trails. All of that is really important work. And I think it's really clear, you know, we've done the hard bit for them. We've done the brainstorming, the ideating, the thinking about what they can do. Actually, what they need to do is just take the leap, take the step, be bold, invest, and yeah, be part of the change rather than letting the change kind of overrun them. And I think, you know, everyone's sharings have been really generous this evening, and I think that really has stayed with this tone of, you know, the key invitation is to be open, to have these conversations with heart, with openness. You know, we bring up Lucozade a lot because it is the brand that we find most often on our trails at the moment. But for all we know, there might be tremendous amount of work happening behind the scenes at Lucozade that we don't know about to make a difference. And so being kind of open to possibility on every side, it feels really important to finding the solution, because we won't agree on everything. I don't think I'm going to agree with everything that, for example, I don't know, the CEO of Coca-Cola says, but actually, why should that inhibit us working together to make change? You know, I think actually if we can agree on some things, and most of us can agree on the fact that we need to protect our natural environment is incredibly important for us and for the future, why can't we then work together to make change and make it better? So that's kind of, I think, my final question that I'll leave you with. We've got a few minutes. Are there any kind of final questions or reflections that people would like to share? There's some really great things coming in on the chat. So Mark said, sustainability is so big at the moment. Surely brands could grow sales by becoming more eco-friendly. Definitely. And then Jill said, there must be refillable options at a bigger scale unless every drink is bottled at the same place it's made. Yeah, that's definitely a question to ask, Jill. That feels like something you could write to a drinks company about and ask. That feels really important. I'll make a note of that. All right, well, I'll leave it there. Guys, thank you so much. This has just been such a wonderful and very generous end to our digital action series. Thank you so much for coming together. It's always so lovely to be with people in space, even if it's in the online, and really come up with tangible ideas for how we can make a trash-free future. So yeah, thank you for being part of helping curate that, and definitely watch this space, because though this is the end of this project, we're definitely still working on our trash-free manifesto, and we'll have a lot more ideas in the future about how you can kind of get involved with these actions and making them a reality. So I'm going to drop a few links in the chat. So first of all, if you want to look into any of the things I talked about throughout the session, some of the research, and also George's amazing blogs that he's written on the TFT website, I've just dropped those in the chat. And also, if you'd like to catch up on any of the previous sessions, you can watch them here. To kind of learn a bit more about our wider work, there's a few links I'm going to drop in the chat. And we're currently celebrating Earth Day 2024, which is on April 22nd, with our Earth Day Spring Clean campaign. So that's all about it's super simple. Get out, remove some trash, report it to our research, help us paint a better picture of the state of our trails, and enjoy being out in the natural world this spring. So I've just dropped in the webpage so you can get involved with that. Before we go, I just want to say a massive thank you to our partners, without whom and their support, we wouldn't be able to make these sessions free. We run on sponsorships, but also from volunteer donations. So also, if you would like to support our work, please consider dropping a donation in this link here. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you all very soon. Thank you. Oh, thanks, guys. Thank you.